And hello, everyone. We will be devoting our entire 2 hours today to an examination of the space shuttle tragedy and a look at where the space program goes from here. With Bryant on vacation, John Palmer joins me at the anchor desk after long duty yesterday. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Jane. Among our guests this morning, Senator Jake Garn, a shuttle traveler himself, and we'll go live to Concord, New Hampshire to talk with the friends of the teacher astronaut, Christa McAuliffe. And we'll talk with a psychologist who will tell us how to deal with what can only be described as this national case of grief.
Well, let's get started with the latest on the shuttle probe from Bob Jameson at the news desk. And good morning, Bob.
Thanks, Jane and John. Good morning. As the nation continues to grieve this morning, the air search for debris from the shuttle, anything that may help explain why Challenger exploded, is resuming. NASA refuses to speculate on the cause of the tragedy, but some space experts this morning believe that a leak in the shuttle's huge external fuel tank was responsible. Dan Molina is standing by at the Johnson Space Center in Houston with the latest on NASA's plans for an investigation. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Bob. The investigation into something as catastrophic as this has to deal with everything from the very obvious to details that even computers may not have noticed. Included in the obvious, yesterday morning at this time, we were talking about icicles that had formed on the shuttle during a bitter cold night. NASA's only stated concern at the time was that an icicle might break off and damage the orbiter's heat protection tiles. But are there other possibilities? Could an icicle have damaged the huge external fuel tank or some connecting fuel line? The details. Is there some facts, some measurement, some hint locked in the data collected in Mission Control that can explain what happened? One of the very first things NASA did after the explosion was to freeze everything here, seal it off so everything will remain as it was at the moment of the disaster. The photographic evidence. The moving pictures appear to show us where the bursts of flame appeared. That could help. It could narrow the investigation to specific points on the main engines, the fuel tank, or the solid rocket boosters, perhaps to the small explosive bolts used to separate the fuel tank from the orbiter. But the video could be deceptive. NASA today will look at still pictures taken with high-powered tracking equipment, and that should provide more details. Beyond that, all day here and for so long to come, the people here will be asking themselves critical questions. Do they recall any design flaw? Anything they worried about that stopped being a concern after so many successful missions? It's all important now in this investigation, a task that is perhaps the most formidable assignment ever tackled here at the Johnson Space Center. Bob?
Dan, thank you. The sudden public death of the 7 astronauts has produced an emotional outpouring around the world. President Reagan ordered all government flags to fly at half-staff until February 3rd. And Concord, New Hampshire, home of teacher Christa McAuliffe, the first ordinary American chosen for space travel, is covered in sadness this morning. Fred Briggs is with us from Concord. Good morning, Fred.
Good morning, Bob. The bitter cold that seemed to have accompanied this tragedy has stilled most of the movement in this small capital of a small state. The cold sinks into people much more readily than the impact of what happened yesterday at Cape Canaveral. You could see that last night at this church.
A memorial service for Christa McAuliffe, here where she, her husband, and 2 children had attended services for years. Some of her students were among the mourners, students who had been looking forward to a 2-way conversation with her from Challenger to the classroom later this week. It's a different lesson now.
And she will teach us because of her ambition, because of her courage, because of her willingness to participate in our space program.
The high school will be closed again today. The students and the teachers who knew her so well are being offered psychological counseling, although many of those counselors knew Christa McAuliffe pretty well themselves. The people are dazed here, not yet ready to start seeking mechanical reasons for what went wrong. They're rather grappling with the metaphysical reasons, because none of this seems to make any sense at all. Bob?
Fred, thank you. Former astronauts this morning are saying that beneath the all-American smiles and the splashdown parties, there always lurked the possibility of tragedy. Deke Slayton, one of the original 7 astronauts, said, "Everyone knows it's going to happen sooner or later, you just hope it's later." And pioneer test pilot Chuck Yeager, for whom the right stuff is named, said there is no way for a pilot to prepare for such a disaster. But Yeager, the first to break the sound barrier, predicted that the space program will recover from the Challenger tragedy. Roy Neal, who has covered the space program from its beginning for NBC News, is at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. Good morning, Roy.
Hi, Bob.
What are your thoughts on the future of the shuttle program?
Well, let's begin with the premise that the United States space program is on hold for an indefinite period of time, as we might also say are the space programs of most of the free world this morning. There's mystification, which has to be resolved. They've got to look into the crystal balls of telemetry and computers to come up with some answers to something that is, at the moment, a total problem. The problem is this. The telemetry coming down from the spacecraft showed no problem in sight until the detonation. Even in Mission Control's commentary, as we listened, the commentary continued after the explosion was seen on our television screens because the commentator was busy looking at that telemetry as it came through. So now they're studying down to the microseconds of time in the telemetry file to see what could have happened. The booster container, quite likely, is one of the things they're looking at most closely, and that's the reason for the search this morning. But as far as the program is concerned, which is the big feature, first, they'll have to figure it out, and then they'll have to figure out what needs to be done about it. In this case, it happened so fast that the astronauts couldn't even push their panic button, the button that would have separated the spacecraft from that booster. There was no time for anything. It just happened, Bob.
Roy, if you remember, as you well do, 20 years ago, almost 2 decades ago, when the Apollo fire occurred, it was 21 months before there was another manned space flight. Do you expect something like that to occur now?
I don't think it'll take that long this time. In that case, the cause of the fire was something that was a total design failure. The spacecraft had to be totally redesigned. In this case, you have the record of 24 successful missions before disaster struck. So I don't think this will be quite that sweeping a change required. But until they figure it out, who are we to second guess them?
All right, Roy Neal, thank you very much. In other news this morning, actress Lily Palmer has died at the age of 71. Palmer, best known for films like Body and Soul and Counterfeit Trader, died of a heart attack at her home in Los Angeles. It's 7:07. Jane?
And thank you, Bob. Willard Scott is here with the weather. I'm struck in a morning like this, or after a day like yesterday, when we're all united as a community around our TVs, sharing that sense that the nation is we're all thinking about the same things at the same time.
It is an incredible emotion. I was thinking, you know, you try to come up with a word because obviously you want to say something to let people know we care, because we all do. I mean, tears are one thing, but it's almost a new meaning to the word tragedy when you see, as you did on television yesterday, the families of the astronauts and the private civilian that was involved in this, and our hearts go out. We can say no more than that, but we all, as you say, Jane, share in the love and affection and just the sorrow of this, because it's such a terrible
Even as
thing.
we all go about the business at hand, which we all will do today.
We continue on, and we do have our little weather forecast for you this morning. We had some contrast in temperatures yesterday. For instance, Miami was 38. That was a record low. Mobile, Alabama was 18. Sault Ste. Marie was 28 below zero yesterday. Record warm weather, Dodge City, Kansas, 73. Albuquerque was 64 degrees. Yuma, Arizona was 84. The big weather story this morning is snow travel. Chicago, Louisville, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Washington, New York, all 2 to 4 inches of snow today. Low pressure centered around the Great Lakes is moving towards the northeast, and with it some snow. The jet stream reveals how temperatures are considerably warmer in the western states, but much, much colder down in Old Dixie. Now, we do have another Arctic blast coming in across Minnesota and Wisconsin this morning. As you can see, Minneapolis-St. Paul is going to get up to about 9 degrees, and that will be it. So this cold air will again move down into the nation's midsection. There'll be a little bit of a warming trend. Atlanta's going to get up to 54. Miami will get up to 64 degrees today, and we'll have some sunshine. But just about the Carolina-Virginia border on up, expect some snow back down through the Ohio and Tennessee Valley, the Great Smokies. Another weather system out west producing rain from about Eureka, California, north of Seattle, some snow in the Cascades and the Sierra Nevada range, and absolutely delightful from San Diego right on across to Roswell, New Mexico, and Dallas-Fort Worth. Here's what's happening in your world right now.
A traveler's advisory in effect this morning for snow and possible freezing rain. 1 or 2 inches of snow is possible with a high today of 34. Tonight's low at 32. Thursday's high 37.
Los Angeles, California can expect some snow, or not some snow, but some rain later on this afternoon. Generally speaking, this morning a little bit on the cloudy side in Southern California, except for San Diego, which will be lovely. A birthday wish this morning, Margaret Peet of Norwalk, Connecticut, is 100 years old. We wish her a very happy birthday. Now here's Jane.
And thank you, Willard. In a moment, we'll be talking to some friends of Krista McAuliffe from her hometown. But first, this is Today on NBC.
will be going up to Concord, New Hampshire shortly for those interviews. When Christa McAuliffe first learned that she was to be the first teacher in space, she really couldn't quite believe it. Last July, when she found out that she'd won, she discussed her excitement with Bryant Gumbel.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Bryant.
Simple question, why you?
It's really hard to say. There were 10 people. We were such a cohesive group, enthusiastic, really enjoying teaching, and I think any one of us would have done a really good job. I don't know what put me over the top, and I'm delighted to be here.
When you first applied for this, did you think you had even a prayer?
I really didn't. I was almost doing it kind of like when you play the lottery. If you don't play it, you don't win.
Sure.
And when I filled out that application, that's really how I felt. I figured there'd be at least 50,000 people across the country who would be slipping that into the mailbox around the same time.
What about when you made it down to the last 10? Did you think then, maybe?
Well, then the possibility became very real, and I really started to think what the impact would be on my teaching career and on my family. Yeah. But it was still really exciting.
Has it all hit you yet?
No, I don't think so. I still can't believe that I'm going to actually be going into that shuttle. It just really doesn't seem possible. Maybe when I'm on the launch pad, it will.
What are you most excited about?
Seeing the Earth from that perspective of that small planet, you know, it's such a big place here, but being able to look at it from a new perspective, and I hope I can bring that wonder and that excitement back to the students.
Maybe just a little bit of fright, too?
Not yet. Maybe when I'm strapped in and those rockets are going off underneath me, there will be, but space flight today really seems safe. We had a good example of that when NASA shut down the last one through the computer because one of the backup systems wasn't working.
You say it seems safe. A lot of people equate that with it also seems boring. Have you been one, have you been one who followed NASA efforts all along, long before?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I can remember watching the Vanguards as they went like this, and I remember Alan Shepard's first suborbital flight, and it was really thrilling.
I read where you said you wanted to demystify space. In plain talk, what does that mean?
Well, we see the space program as a science or math or technological adventure right now. I want the students to get a little bit of ownership. I want them to feel that they're part of the space age because they're the future and their children or grandchildren are going to be pioneering that. So I really hope to bring an ordinary person's perspective to this.
Have you heard from some of your students yet?
Yes, I have. They've been dropping by the house. They've been sending me cards. They've been calling. That's been super.
NASA, of course, has a selfish interest in all this. I mean, they want to build up public support for the huge outlays that are necessary to keep the program going. As part and parcel of being the first ordinary citizen, I mean, are you expected to be the ordinary speaker who's out there making speeches on NASA's behalf all along?
That's going to come. Certainly will, but I'm also delighted that the teaching profession and students and the whole country is really going to benefit from this. We hopefully are going to know an awful lot more about what life is like aboard the shuttle.
Yeah. You go up on January the 22nd.
That's what the date is, yes,
of 86, right now. And we're hoping that that'll be met. What are you most concerned about between now and then?
Well, probably just getting my life in order. I do have a family in Concord, New Hampshire, and I have to get them set. I also want to make sure my replacement in school is going to be comfortable for next year.
Any thoughts, however slight, that you might not measure up once it gets going?
Well, one of the things that has been really surprising is all of the publicity, and I was saying to my husband the other night, it's almost like I'm reading about somebody else, you know?
Well, it's a dream come true for you.
Oh, it certainly is.
That interview seen here on Today last July. In just a minute, we'll go up to Concord, New Hampshire to talk with some of Christa's friends. Right now, this is Today on NBC.
And, of course, any death of an American astronaut is going to hit all of us hard, but in this case, maybe it hurts a little more because one of the people who died was one of us, a civilian. The teacher astronaut, Christa McAuliffe, lived in Concord, New Hampshire. And we go now to St. Peter's Church in Concord as three people who knew Christa McAuliffe very well join us. The pastor of the church she attended, Father Chester Moroka of St. Peter's Church, her next-door neighbor, Ginny Timmons, and a family friend, Pam Tarbell. Thank you all for being with us. And I should say at the outset that we do have some audio difficulties this morning. I think we would be able to hear you well enough. We'll try. Father Chester, your parishioners must be turning to you with the unanswerable question, why does such a thing happen to such a good person? What do you say? Father, I'm afraid I was unable to hear your remarks. Your microphone evidently is not working. Ginny or Pam, Pam, I understand your son Miles was little Scotty McAuliffe's best friend. Does Miles comprehend any of this? No, we're striking out here too in audio. I think maybe we should just try to repatch this and come back a little later. Where's John Palmer? If John could come join me, we'll try to get back to Concord, New Hampshire. Meanwhile, Steve Delaney is still down at Cape Canaveral this morning. Steve, what does the Cape look like on the morning after?
Jane,
Steve Delaney?
Bleak. Yes, Jane, I can hear you. It looks pretty bleak down here right now. There, as you might imagine, in the wake of such a thing as happened yesterday, those members of the news corps who were not... I'm sorry, I'm responsible for that problem. I had it in my pocket trying to keep warm. It is cold down here, Jane, and fairly bleak. Those members of the press corps who were not here yesterday morning showed up in droves yesterday afternoon. I think one of the ways that we can look at what happened yesterday from now on in an attempt to understand how they're going about the investigation is to consider what happens when there is a plane crash, which happens all too often. The National Transportation Safety Board goes at it in several different directions, one of which is to try to put together the pieces of the wreckage. There aren't many pieces, but the search for them goes on and continued through the night last night.
Steve, I'm going to interrupt you just now, and we will get back to you for more of your report. But I understand we do have Concord back, I'm hoping,
Okay.
in which case I can reintroduce Father Moroka, a neighbor and a family friend of Christa McAuliffe. Father Chester Moroka, what I was asking was, when your parishioners come to you for the answer to the question, why does such a thing happen to such a good person as Christa, what do you say?
Well, we don't have an answer for that, Jane. We simply try to be supportive. As we mentioned last night at our service, we simply see the value of her work, of her contribution to this program, and the example that she's been to the nation, especially to the young people. Other than that, we simply try to be supportive.
Ginny Timmons, you're the next door neighbor. You have 8 children, I understand. One of your daughters has an autographed picture of Christa. What did Christa say in that autograph?
Well, I brought the picture with me, Jane, just because the picture bespeaks Christa's charisma that all of us felt. My daughter is a freshman and received this as a high schooler, but I think any of us on reading it could identify as well.
And what does she say?
In it, she speaks of, to Jean, may your future be limited only by your dreams. Love, Christa.
Well, what about the dreams of a young woman? Are they going to be traumatized by the loss?
I'm sure for everyone, they're devastated, but it's a temporary devastation. I think all of us, as I say, I readily identify not only with what has happened to Christa, but to her families and the other astronauts and their families.
Pam, you have known Christa for a long time as a dear family friend. We know, obviously, she was a devoted teacher, a modern working mother. But she was more than that to her family, obviously. How did she do it all, in the phrase of the day?
She had lots of energy. And what you saw on television through the media is how she acted all the time. She was an excellent mother. She spent lots of time with her children, taking them all over the place, doing the things that all the mothers do. It was hard for her, I think, to leave her children and go back to school, but she was so dedicated about teaching that she was able to combine the two, and she had lots of support from her husband, Steve, and from the people around her, and she was able to carry it off.
Ginny, everybody's so concerned about Steve and the little kids. You watched them next door the last 4 months without Mom. They doing okay?
Right. Well, I think one of the nice things, Mrs. Polly, is that Steve is such a loving person, and he readily took on the role of both parents when Christa left.
Thank you to all of you. I'm going to have to interrupt. You've been champs through this. A station break.
Thank you, Jane.
We're back at 7:30. I'm Jane Pauley here with John Palmer while Bryant Gumbel is off this week. And as we continue in this half hour with our assessment of the Challenger tragedy, we'll be going to Washington to talk to Senator Jake Garn. He has flown a space shuttle mission, and among those who died were men and women he counts as personal friends. We'll also talk to Senator Pete Domenici, a member of the subcommittee that appropriates funds for the space program.
And we'll also hear from two former astronauts who themselves experienced frightening emergencies in outer space, David Scott and Alan Bean. Bean, by the way, also was involved in the training of 5 of those who were lost aboard the Challenger.
And we'll also meet 14-year-old Peter Billingsley. He's the national spokesman for the Young Astronauts program, and he was at the Cape yesterday watching that liftoff. But first, at the news desk, here's Bob Jameson.
Jane, there are no firm answers this morning to the question of why the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up little more than a minute after it was launched from Cape Canaveral. All 7 astronauts were killed. Today, a search is on in the Atlantic for any debris that might provide a clue as to what went wrong. Steve Delaney is standing by with a report from Cape Canaveral. Steve, good morning.
Good morning, Bob. Actually, the search has been going on since right after the disaster yesterday. It has simply intensified since we had daylight, but it went on through the night and will continue until they're convinced they can't find anything else. Ships have been doing most of the heavy work during the night because they can get down closer to the water, and they have electromagnetic devices which can kind of try to pinpoint where there are larger pieces. So far, most of what's been found is quite small, 2 feet by 5 feet, has been recovered but has not been identified. With the coming of daylight, it will be possible to use aircraft once again and to get broader spanses of the ocean covered. The area is several hundred square miles. It's centered about 30 miles off the coast. Now, whatever's on the bottom is going to be very hard to discover because it's in the edge of the Gulf Stream. The bottom is sloping off toward the edge of the continental shelf. And because the water is of different temperatures out there, it's fairly turbid and is going to yield evidence rather slowly, Bob, and answers even more reluctantly.
Steve, thank you. Krista McAuliffe, the enthusiastic, outgoing teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, lost her life as her family and others from her hometown looked on from the ground. Dennis Murphy reports.
NASA gave the good seats to the kids from Concord, the bleachers just opposite the shuttle.
I'm nervous for her, and I'm really proud of her.
Krista McAuliffe, their teacher, was on the spaceship. The kids huddled in the cold grandstand right behind their teacher's mother, father, and sister. The moment had arrived. At first, it was hard to tell what happened. The 3rd graders who go to school with Krista's boy were led away. Something had gone terribly wrong. Smoke in the sky, confusion. The wonderful adventure ended before it began.
I'd like to say something in particular, something special to the school children of our nation, and especially those from Concord. You must try to understand that spirit, bravery, and commitment are what make not only the space program, but all of life worthwhile. We must never, as people in our daily lives or as a nation, stop exploring, stop hoping, stop discovering. We must press on.
The kids flew home last night. Dennis Murphy, NBC News, the Kennedy Space Center.
Actress Lily Palmer has died after a heart attack. She was 71 years old. There's other news this morning. In the Middle East, Israeli warplanes attacked 3 Palestinian guerrilla camps near Sidon, Lebanon. There are reports that 1 man was killed and 6 injured. And the Bank of Japan today cut its key interest rate by ½ a percentage point, leading to speculation that interest rates may fall further in this country. It's 7:34, Jane.
Thank you, Bob. Willard will have the weather for us in just a moment. And then we'll talk to Peter Billingsley. You may recall him from the TV show Real People. Well, he was watching the Challenger launch yesterday with some of Krista McAuliffe's students. First, these messages. And for our Wednesday morning look at the weather, here's Willard.
Hey, Jane, good morning to you and good morning, everybody. I got a great piece of very optimistic news here for anybody that's in the reporting business. Jane, catch this. Margaret Moore of B County, Texas, is 100 years old today. She is the oldest living reporter. She started work for the Beeville Bee-Picayune in 1895, and she still writes for the paper. She's thinking of maybe retiring after her birthday today. I hope not, Ethel. Hang in there. Ethel Pinkston of Seattle, Washington is 100. She worked until she was 84, and she said, I think I'll take it easy. Little gooey duck soup. Look out, Boston. If you're in Detroit, if you're in Cleveland, Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, I could always get a job with Amtrak this morning because these are the cities that are expecting some snow. 2 to 4 inches of it. This is what you call our big weather story of the day. And this snow will be from just about Washington, D.C., maybe Richmond, Virginia on up, 2 to 4 inches. The southern states are considerably milder today than they were yesterday after some record lows. Miami's going to be 64 and mostly sunny. Look at Dallas-Fort Worth, 70. The southern plains, same thing, except a new blast of Arctic air moving down in from the northern plains and upper Mississippi. Warm all across the southern tier of states, but rain in the northwest from about Eureka, California, north to Seattle, snow in the mountains. Light snow. Here's what's happening in your world this morning.
A traveler's advisory this morning for rain or wet snow with possible 1 to 2 inch accumulation. Today's high at 34. It'll be cloudy tonight with a 60% chance of rain or wet snow, down to 32 for a low.
That's it for right now. 7:37. Here's Shane.
Thank you, Willard. The picture of the Challenger space shuttle exploding will remain in the national consciousness for so long. But for those who watched the launch and the tragedy from the grandstands at the Cape, the experience and the shock will be indelible. Among those in the grandstand were the parents of teacher Krista McAuliffe, who chose to watch the launch with students from their daughter's New Hampshire school, actually the classmates of her son, little Scott. And Peter Billingsley was there, the national spokesman for the Young Astronauts program. And Peter joins us this morning from his hometown of Phoenix and our NBC affiliate there, KPNX-TV. And welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
Peter, would you explain how it came to pass that you were there at the launch yesterday?
Well, I was invited as a guest of the Young Astronaut program. I was there to host some pre-launch parties, and we were waiting for the launch. It was first scheduled for the 22nd, but then it kept on being moved up, and then finally on that day we saw it.
Had you ever seen a launch before?
Only on the news. This was my first one that I've ever seen up close.
So you would have no way of knowing as you watch clear the tower and disappear in the sky, as I've seen it do, that something might have gone wrong, or did you sense that something was wrong?
It looked all fine. It was going up straight. I thought that everything was great. I guess some people had thought later that it took a slower liftoff than it should have, but I didn't really know that because this was my first time. I saw it lift off, then I could see the trail going down, then I saw a big round cloud of smoke, which I guess was where it blew up, and I wasn't really sure what that was. I thought that maybe it was the solid rocket boosters leaving because I didn't really know. But then I saw this thing that was twisting and was moving, and at that point, I knew that something was wrong. But the only thing was that the people that knew that something was wrong were in so much shock that they didn't scream or anything. They just were silent.
What was your first confirmation that something had gone terribly wrong?
Okay, we were all cheering and screaming. Then there was a microphone that was right out in front of us, and we could make out the word malfunction. And with that, everybody started to be quiet. There were still some other people. Then we heard the words, "The vehicle has exploded." And with that, everybody went into
Peter,
trauma.
who was there? The parents were there. There were a lot of little kids,
Yes.
much younger than you. Was there anybody there to look after them?
Yes, there were. There were some of the kids' mothers that were there. Just everybody was in a huge state of shock. They were all in panic, and it was just an awful, awful thing.
Now, you as a spokesman for the Young Astronauts program,
Yes, I am.
Did that mean that you wanted to grow up and be an astronaut yourself?
It doesn't really mean that I want to grow up and be an astronaut. It's just what the Young Astronaut program is it's an educational program that's backed by the president, and it's geared towards kids from 6 to 16, and it's mainly to prepare them for life in the 21st century, because with everything growing so fast now that we want to be ready for that time.
Do you still want to be ready, or did the shock and the trauma yesterday change your mind somehow?
No, I think that even though it's an awful thing, like President Reagan said, we've got to keep going. We've got to keep moving with full force. I think we should find out what happened wrong, and possibly today's young astronauts can possibly make a fuel tank that would be less prone to blowing up, or could make a possible escape hatch on the shuttle.
Do you feel your job as a spokesman for the Young Astronauts program is all the more important today?
I don't know. I wouldn't say it's all the more important. It is probably a little bit more important, but right now we just want to heighten the awareness of people that in this country right now, the academic standards are very low compared to Russia and Germany and Japan and all these other places.
Astronauts have to be pretty brave people, don't they?
Yes, yes, they do.
Well, Peter, thank you for being with us, and I guess we certainly know now that there is absolutely a frontier out there yet to be conquered by your generation.
Yes,
thanks,
there
Peter.
is.
We'll be
Thank you.
back in a moment with two former astronauts who survived harrowing experiences in space after these messages.